I said I was stressed before mine because I had like never even heard of Talk Abroad before my class. And so I was like, our slots that we did for my class were 15 minutes each. And I was just wondering, like, during our first, we had to do 4 sessions throughout my class. And so during the first one, I had only been studying Spanish for like 2 whole weeks. So I was very nervous and I was like, how am I going to fill up a whole 15 minutes? And I was also having some technical difficulties, so I was like a minute or two late, and so I immediately like slipped into English, like trying to apologize. But as the conversation went on, she was very nice. Actually, all the people that I talked to, I never had a person who was like unwilling to like help me when I like forgot a certain word or like who couldn't carry the conversation on. And like yeah, like everyone said, the 15 minutes passed by a lot quicker than I thought.
I can relate to that. One time where I just was like, I was thankful for the person I was speaking with was I was describing a vacation I had been on and I didn't know the word for roller coaster. And so I was just like, roller coaster, like, because they can't speak English with you on the call or like another language, you know? And then I was just really grateful because it was embarrassing, but like who's gonna learn the word roller coaster in a different language? And so then like my talk abroad partner just like explained it in French without ever like switching over to English for me. And so that was kind of cool because I didn't really know what to do in the moment. And but then yeah, like you said last time, it's kind of okay to make mistakes. It's not really like gonna be graded or something like that. And so it was just nice to be like, okay, I can just ask how to say this, you know? And I think that was one time. And then also, I think it's really common in a call to mix up words. Like for me, I always mix up work and travel in the French language, and I don't know why, but and so sometimes I think like mixing up your words can be kind of funny for the person speaking like the native language because they're like, what? And then they know the language so well, they're like, oh, I think they meant this. And it's so that can be kind of funny sometimes.
Welcome to this Talk Abroad session. Thanks for joining us. My name is Todd. I'm the president here at Talk Abroad, and I'm joined here by Daniel Trigo. Dan, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yep, my name is Daniel Trago. I'm here at Michigan State University, and I do digital media and have taught Spanish for many years and do some curriculum development.
How long have you been working with Talk Abroad?
How long I have been with Talk Abroad? What did we say? 10 years?
I think it's more like 9, but that's basically the whole time.
9 years, 10 years. Let's round up. Come on.
Well, let me before we dig into this, let me lay out a little bit of an agenda and put this video in context. This is the 5th of 7 videos that we've been doing. The first 4 are all related to specific themes on ways that you can change or challenge students and develop your curriculum using Talk Abroad. These last 3 are focused on implementation and assessment. So this video is specifically geared towards a 100 level or a novice level curriculum implementation with Talk Abroad. The main goal of this video is kind of twofold. Number one is to walk through how to think about implementing Talk Abroad in your curriculum, some things that work really well, some patterns that we've seen in successful implementations, and maybe also some of the pitfalls that are easy to see and avoid if you know what they are. And then secondly, focusing on some resources that you can use as you're developing your curriculum if you want to dive a little bit deeper into your specific curriculum. Daniel, a general question for you saying, if somebody watching this is a 100 level professor who's watched one of the previous videos and said, I really want to personalize my class a little bit by having students talk with a native speaker about something that's interesting with them. I want to get the students excited, something like that. Where does somebody like that start as they're thinking through how to implement Talk Abroad in their curriculum?
Yeah, so I think maybe the first way to get started would be to start small or think small, right? So like, one conversation. I think that's kind of the pitfall when you do something new. You try to think about all the different ways you can use it. But I would say just start small. So if you're in a 100 level course or a beginner course, however you have it numbered, I would say start with finding a spot in your curriculum where having a conversation with a native speaker makes sense. So not just doing it to do it, but finding a place where it has purpose, I think is probably the very first thing you should start with.
What types of purposes, or what purpose would make sense in that 100 level curriculum?
Yeah, so I think especially in a 100 level, obviously, as students are beginning their language learning journey, they're kind of at the spot now where they have some memorized chunks of language. And so I think especially in those beginning courses, it's really good to use TalkAbroad kind of in towards the end of a sequence. So say I'm going through a unit or a chapter or even a semester. And basically, I think this is a really good spot then to help the students, and not just as like an assessment, oh, did you learn this? Did you not learn this? But like giving the students this opportunity to say, hey, we've spent X amount of time learning these things. Now is a time that you can put them into practice and see how they work outside of a textbook, outside of a classroom, outside of a worksheet. And I think that's actually a very motivating, albeit somewhat scary, maybe the first time for students, but like, oh yeah, I'm learning a language for the purpose of being able to communicate with someone.
Yeah, yeah. We sometimes think about the TalkAbroad experience as a kind of mini immersion experience, like a quick way to take a student and dunk them in the culture, get them exposed to the culture a little bit. And sometimes that type of purpose, at the 100 level specifically, what we're talking about, it's not likely that students are going to be taking huge steps forward in oral comprehension or in their grammar or things like that. But what does make sense as you're thinking about the curriculum implementation is getting the students engaged, getting the students exposure to a culture, getting them excited with even just one conversation, like you said, starting small, jumping in, getting a little bit of exposure.
Yeah, and I think we see this across the board with many students who have studied language but don't have that experience, that immersion experience, right? And the first time is always scary, whether it's on TalkAbroad, whether you go somewhere, where you meet someone. And I think the only way to start to normalize that interaction is through practice. Just jumping in and doing it. And I love that TalkAbroad is also kind of like a really low cost, low stakes way to do that, right?
Yeah. Let's jump into a couple of videos from students sharing a little bit of what they've experienced, and we'll see if we can draw out, because I think there are some patterns in the way that professors will use TalkAbroad that are really strong. So let's take a look at these and see if we can pull out some of those patterns.
Okay.
Prior to the conversations, I would sit down and I would open up the chapters in my book that related to the content that I was going to be going over in my conversation. And I would just kind of practice making sentences that I would either ask them or what I might expect them to ask me. And I would just rehearse those out loud. I've learned that out loud especially helped because I was more prepared to speak back and forth with my partner. And then I would type up a document that had all of those statements on it. So kind of a quick reference. That way, if I got stuck in conversation, I could look at my paper real quick and kind of catch up to where I was or what I might need to say if I couldn't come up with it completely on my own out of my head. We had to go through and we talked about what we discussed with our partners. We had just a few simple questions to answer about them, where they were from, what their city was like, and then questions pertaining to whatever the topic was. For instance, one of them we discussed clothing. So we wrote just a short little paragraph about, their clothing preferences and what they enjoyed wearing or where they wore items to. And then we had kind of what we're doing here. We discussed how we like talk abroad, and our feelings before the conversation and after the conversation.
So my professors, before every conversation we had to prepare, they told us what topic we were supposed to talk about, and then we had to prepare at least 10 questions about that topic. So for the first time, it was basic information like your family and your friends and like what activities you like to do. But as we went through more units and more like tenses, such as like the past tense, we were able to talk about like past experiences and jobs and like how is like the city where you are and like healthcare and like more contemporary things like that. And then after the experience, we had to write the answers to the questions that we prepared beforehand. And we also had to write like a report of interesting cultural information that we learned throughout the conversation. Well, for the reflection activities, we had to write down the answers to the questions that we prepared beforehand. And then we also had to write 3 pieces of either new words or cultural information that we learned.
Yeah, so I think this is important, and it kind of we've talked at kind of the maybe the macro level of what you might do as a professor. Like, okay, start small. I've got one activity, and these are kind of the outcomes I want. And I think these students are starting to get at a little bit more of like the micro or the strategy behind the vision, right? So I think it's we just have to kind of preface this with, if you send a 100 level student into a conversation without any preparation, without any guidance, without any like outcomes, it's probably not going to go very well. And that's a really nice way of saying that, right?
we can be very distinct or direct in saying that from my experience, and I've been doing this working with professors for 10 years, I will oftentimes know ahead of time whether the implementation is going to be successful or not at any level based on the way that it's being structured and the preparation that the students are doing ahead of time and the reflection that they're doing afterwards. And that's at all levels. The 100 level is the most distinct, right? Those students are going to really have trouble if they're not prepared. But even a 200 level or a 300 level course, a portion of the students really depend on that preparation in order to have a successful experience.
Yeah, and so this is where I bring in the word scaffolding. And we hear this a lot in language acquisition, like how do you scaffold and structure activities that build upon each other, but making sure there's the adequate foundation at all times, right? So I think we see this pattern here with the students. Number one, starting out with brainstorming some questions. I mean, these are conversations, and especially at lower levels, like basically novice, maybe even more intermediate level students, like they can frame questions and elicit responses, and they can answer questions, but it's hard to just dialogue outside of that, right? They're not generally in control of the conversation, or able to manipulate it the way they might want it to go. They're very reliant on their conversation partner. So here, I believe it was Rebecca at the beginning was like, hey, I read out a bunch of questions and I practice those questions and I say them out loud, right? Like, so she's going through this scaffolding for herself. Like, I don't want the first time I ask some of these things to be like in real time. And that's a good strategy for a beginning learner. And the professor encouraged that. They had a specific goal that they were looking for. She actually talked a little bit about the reflection piece and that, oh yeah, we had to come back and talk about the country and the place they live and some of these things. So there's a task, right? And it's well defined. And I think that's really helpful. And sometimes we would maybe hesitate to say, oh, a conversation is a task. Like those kind of feel like opposites, right? But it's true. Like in language learning, this task is really important because you then as a student can like know when you've achieved something, right? And you have a goal and you're working towards something.
And it also puts the assignment in context for the student, because another regular thing that is a pitfall in this is when the student doesn't understand how this experience connects to what they're supposed to be learning and how the curriculum is formatted. So letting the student explicitly know, this is why we're doing the conversation, this is what you're going to get out of it, and here's the reflection afterwards, that you're going to be doing, really fits in and helps the student understand, so it's not busy work.
Yeah, and I think Mia talked about that too in the second video. Like, hey, like we have these structures from our professor that helped us. Like we were able to do, like I was able to talk about past activities because there was some structure, because we did that in class. We prepared. I know about it. It's like, this isn't the first time Mia's ever spoken in the past tense. Like this just is out of the blue, right? There's this scaffolding. There's this entire process that basically we want students to succeed in this, right? So we want to give them as much preparation as possible and direction.
And what about the reflection activities afterwards? What's the purpose of those?
Yeah, I think especially true. Again, this is almost everything we say is going to be true across the board for all levels, but especially true in the 100 level. There is so much going on in a student's brain during the conversation that I can probably confidently say that they're not picking up everything in real time. And so I love the fact that they can go back and listen to this conversation and then reflect on it, because I think that extra attention to the input and the ability to listen to things when the stakes are even lower, right? So like I'm not like fretting, I'm not worrying about how do I look on video, am I framed right, like, oh, if I don't understand this, or what happens, or something lagged out for a second, or my cat jumped on my lap. And like our brains are like, especially we're all really aware of these things and video chatting platforms nowadays. But like there's so much going on that you miss stuff. And in the reflection, you get a chance to interact with it again, right? And I think that's really powerful. And again, that connection piece. So not just personal self-reflection, but also then as a class, students get to learn from each other. And for me, that's a win in my thinking about how the classroom should work. I hesitate to always be, what do they say? Oh, the sage on the stage, right? Where like all knowledge comes from the professor and is disseminated to the students.
Mm-hmm.
I love to see like, what do the students bring to the classroom? What do the students learn from each other? And these personal experiences that they have with these speakers is gold, right? Like they're then experts on their conversation. And then they bring that in and then they can test and see, compare and contrast. I love the ability to reflect together on that too.
Yeah, that's great. Let me put this conversation back into a little bit of a summary format of what we discussed here a little bit. So a standard 100 level 101 novice low type of TalkAbroad implementation can start all the way at just one conversation during the semester. From my experience, I would say that the average at this level would be 2 to 3 probably. Always a 15-minute conversation. We do have professors that will do 30-minute conversations. That's great. It's a different thing. That's not kind of the standard implementation. So 1 to 3 15-minute conversations. They always take place in 3 parts almost without exception. First would be some sort of scaffolding and preparation activities. As simple as, like Rebecca said, writing out questions, practicing them, preparing. Preparation activities. The conversation topics themselves are going to be conversations. Sometimes they can be task-oriented. Learn these things about your conversation partner. At the 100 level, they're going to stay in a pretty narrow field of inquiry, right? They're not going to be going off on tangents. That's perfectly fine. Post-conversation, there's always some sort of reflection activity. How did it go? Let's talk about this as a class. Let's reflect about it in writing. Let's listen to it based on the recording that we have. That would be 95 out of 100, 100 level implementations summed up right there. One of our goals in this is to kind of explain that type of thing, and then also to point towards some resources, because TalkAbroad is flexible enough that you can take it and customize it in any way that you want for your curriculum, but you don't need to. And one of the big resources that we have right now are what we call TalkAbroad sequences that do that for you. They're a set of preparation activities, a conversation topic that matches those, and then a set of reflection activities. And Daniel has worked with us in developing those. And so why don't we take, Daniel, would you be okay taking 3 or 4 minutes and just kind of walking through one of those sequences so that people can see it here, how that looks put into practice with a specific topic?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so we're going to take a look at one of the sequences that we've developed. And I love how Todd said, you know, like, hey, TalkAbroad is really flexible in how you implement it. People use it in many different ways. But I would say the one thing that really just should be rigid is this preparation, interaction, reflection stages. Like if I were to prescribe anything with TalkAbroad, it would be to really make sure all 3 of these steps are present. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at this. This is the student workbook, and we're going to take a look at a conversation on family. So this is really cool. Obviously, this kind of works the student through the whole scheduling process and what they should be doing for preparation. Now, when we say scaffolding, preparation, but here we're going to look at obviously review vocabulary that is relevant to conversations about families and relationships. So this might be what you've done during your unit, what's in your textbook, on websites, things you've read. And again, it's especially helpful for this 100 level, not that you read what you write, but that you have kind of like a helpline, right? So then we start to plan, okay, what are the questions we can ask our conversation partner about themselves and their family? And I always talk to my students as they're preparing, hey, if like your whole conversation partner hinges on like, so we go through just, hey, try not to do yes, no questions. And another thing that I think is super important, and we always forget to tell students this, and students forget it too, how would you respond to all of the questions that you're asking? Because more often than not, in normal conversation, I say, hey, how are you today, Todd? And what's your answer?
I'm doing well. How
Does
are
it
you,
usually?
Daniel?
Yeah, right there. But like almost inevitably, any conversation that you have and you ask someone a question, they're going to ask you the same question back.
And that's a really standard flow with 100 level conversations.
100%.
Planned questions, I ask them, they ask them back.
Yep. So then here's this practice. Rebecca talked about this. Hey, do your questions out loud, talk about it, find a partner, practice with it, try this out. What are some places that you're having trouble that you find out within this practice? And then we do have one too, kind of techniques of, these discourse techniques that help, not just related to the content itself, but how to make information flow, or like, can you repeat that? Or I don't understand.
And in some, we hear from a lot of professors in that section that they'll do real simple things like, how do I start the conversation at a 100 level? How can I say hello? How can I say goodbye at the end without being abrupt? And those types of discussions are both really fun learning for students, but then also really apply to make it a fun experience.
So then here we've got our interaction. We're saying with the 100 level, 15-minute conversations are generally the way to go. You can structure 30 minutes, right?
Yeah, and one quick note on this as well. You'll see the way that the conversation topics are formatted. It frames the entire discussion as a basic conversation that you can accomplish in 15 minutes. Many professors will think that it's helpful to list 20 topics that cover everything they've learned so far, just in case the student can't do it and they're going to go to the next question. Usually that actually works against the student in this type of thing. So making sure that the actual conversation topic fits the time allotted is really important.
So reflection, again, I am the biggest proponent of using that audio recording ad nauseum. Like, let's use this a lot. But again, getting off some of those, okay, how did the conversation go? And these are kind of markers, again, for student confidence. I think it's really, really important. And I would probably say, yeah, we want to start small with one conversation. But I love what Todd said, like, maybe even across the board, like 2 or 3 conversations is probably better because it starts to show growth, right? And students being able to see their progress, I think, is key in terms of motivation and building confidence in the classroom and outside. And then we are also big fans of the transcription process. TalkAbroad is generally thought of as a speaking and listening thing, but I think we want to bring writing in here in an interesting way. So I always have students transcribe the most interesting part of their conversation. So this transcription process really helps us start to be able to like identify the individual words that are present in these like chunks of speech. We bring in cultural comparisons, list new words that we learned during the conversation. This is kind of the flow through the student workbook for a conversation.
To bring us back again, that's a student workbook that's available. You can implement TalkAbroad in your curriculum in any way you want. But if you're just getting started with a 100 level course, our suggestion would be to set up a preparation assignment ahead of time, have them do a conversation, and then a reflection assignment. And a very easy way to get started doing that without inviting a lot of planning and preparation on your part is to use one of our pre-designed workbooks. We noted, or we have in the description, that there are free workbooks available. You'll find links to those below the video. You can use, I think we have 60 or 70 different workbooks available. Some include one conversation all the way up to 5 or 6 conversations. They can also be customized. So jump into those. Look, that will be your easiest kind of entree into trying TalkAbroad out once or twice with your students. Daniel, let's real quickly jump into how can you help, or what do you do when some students are very nervous about this type of activity ahead of time?
Yeah, maybe every student. I don't know if I've met one who's just like from the get-go, first conversation, like, oh yeah, I'm totally ready for this, and I'm not nervous at all. Yeah, so the only way to get better at speaking and to start to take off some of that anxiety around speaking is to speak more. That's all there is. And so having mock conversations in class, I think, is really like, hey, let's prepare for the whole conversation we're going to have on TalkAbroad, but let's just run it in the classroom, and we do it with each other, or you do it with the teacher. And I know, Todd, you've seen me use this in the past. I've actually kind of brought in one 15-minute conversation, and I facilitate it as an entire class together.
Yep.
And so, like, I've got 25 students who are all there to help each other, and then I'm also there to kind of like help mediate. And it's like to show them this is how the technology works, because technology can be part of the anxiety. Like, this is how nice the speakers are. This is how easy it is to use the chat. This is how, like, this is what it feels like. And I think that's always been gold for them, just to see it in a super non-threatening way. Instead of like, oh, I'm going to assign you this thing. You go to this website and set up and you're on your own. It's like,
Yeah. I'll encourage professors simply talk about your Talk Abroad conversation regularly. So at the 100 level, for instance, if you're just doing 1 or 2 conversations, those are going to be backloaded during the semester. They're going to be in the second half. They're going to be at the end, right?
Yep.
You have the entire semester where you can be building the students up and saying, you know, we're talking about daily schedules right now, and guess what? In 6 weeks, you're going to be having a conversation. This is one of those topics that you can talk about with your real live native speaker living in Latin America or living in Africa speaking French. What questions from this could we ask and practice it? You know, and contextualize when you're doing conversations between students in class and they feel very, you know, fake and things like that. Let them know this is practice, because this isn't going to be fake. In 6 weeks or in 2 weeks, you're going to do this with a real person. So let's practice now. And even just getting the student familiar and thinking about this, normalizing the fact that in Spanish, we speak Spanish to other people, in French, in German, in Italian. It's not, we don't just fill in workbooks, we actually talk to people, can get them thinking about that and lower that anxiety over the course of the semester in some ways.
Start to frame everything you do in light of that Talk Abroad conversation.
And so this is one of the areas where integrating it throughout the semester, making sure that everything's connected to actually having the conversations, gives a lot of value to the grammar and the vocabulary that they're learning, and really shows up on some of those reflections at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up here. I want to give a quick summary and then point to the resources that people can look to, because we've done a good kind of overview of everything here. At the 100 level, almost all universities will use 15-minute conversations, 1 to 3 conversations. Less is more, because you want to make sure you have plenty of time for preparation, scaffolding activities, preparing the students. Then you have a conversation topic that's short and conversational, fits a 15-minute time frame. And then you have reflection activities afterwards that help the student unpack, either on their own outside of class or even in class. That's a standard implementation right there. It also, Talk Abroad conversations can be customized in lots of different ways, and I want to point everybody towards a number of resources. The first one are the sequences that we have. These are going to let you see preparation and reflection activities that work. They just do. So if you want to grab it, use it as is, it's ready to go as a lesson plan that you can stick right into your curriculum right now. You'll see it says this will take your students about 2 hours. If you want to cut it down to an hour, delete some of it, customize some of it any way that you want to fit kind of what your goals are. But those sequences are there to be used, and there's 60 or 70 of them available right now. Secondly, we have a mentoring program. If you've watched our series of videos here, you've seen a lot of professors that are sharing what they're doing in class. Nearly every one of those professors has volunteered to be a mentor to professors who are trying to implement Talk Abroad for the first time. So if you're thinking about it and you want to be able to sit down and talk with another professor and brainstorm your curriculum and get some ideas from somebody that's used it, reach out to us. We'll be able to set that up for you and set aside a 30-minute session with a professor that's using Talk Abroad. The third resource that you have available to you is we do provide free consulting on specific curriculum. So if you want to take a very specific curriculum, talk with our team, unpack how Talk Abroad might fit into it and what a good number of topics would be, a good number of conversations, how to do that, we can provide some free consulting and talk that through with you. All of that is available right on your website. The sequences, the mentoring, the curriculum development consulting is on the left-hand side of your page under consulting and resources. You can fill out a form and get in touch with us, and we'll set you up with somebody that can walk through this process with you. That information is all active. We also have all of the old videos and a lot more professors sharing what they do on our YouTube channel. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper and get into some very specific curriculum implementation rather than kind of the broad overview that we looked at here, jump onto our YouTube channel and look through the videos that are there, because there's going to be a lot of resources right there for you. I think that wraps us up for today. Daniel, anything that you want to add? We covered all?
I think we covered it all, Todd. There's
I
nothing.
think we're going to need to edit.
No, it was great. I think this is a great way to get started, right? And again, there's, like you said, like this is super customizable. And again, I would always, just my advice is make sure you contextualize it. That's maybe the problem with textbooks is they're built for everybody, so they might not work for anybody really, really well, right? So take this as the launch point and really tailor it to the context of you, your students, where you live, your classroom, and I think that's the way that it will be the most successful.
Perfect. Thank you for joining, Daniel.
Hey, thanks, Todd.
Hi, and welcome to TalkAbroad. TalkAbroad is a worldwide community that supports students during their language learning journey by providing authentic one-on-one conversations with trained native speakers. In this video, we're going to walk through the process of setting up your class for the semester. Let's dive in. Go ahead and log in to your TalkAbroad account. If you don't yet have an account, you can create one from our homepage, talkabroad.com. On your professor homepage, you'll see the steps to get started. We're going to create a section for each class you are teaching, populate those sections with assignments, and then provide the necessary instructions to your students. Let's add a new section. After saving your new section, you'll notice a section code has been created that begins with the first 5 letters of your last name. You'll need to provide this code to your students to allow them to register. When viewing your section, the column on the left will be populated with your students as they register. When you click on a student name, you'll see the conversation details and be able to access the audio recording. The column on the right contains your assignments. Assignments are your way of communicating with the conversation partner. Make a special note of the box labeled Topic for the Conversation. Usually 5 to 6 sentences in the target language describing the topic works really well. Create a separate assignment for each conversation your students will complete. As you know, our conversation partners are not tutors and will not be providing explicit feedback or any teaching. Feel free to reach out to your main contact at TalkAbroad for help creating assignments or to schedule a free session with a curriculum consultant. Before we end, let's quickly review the 2 things your students will need in order to get started. 1. They'll need the section code located on your professor homepage in order to register. 2. They'll need a link to the TalkAbroad student instructional video and instruction manual. With those 2 things, your students will have everything they need to register, purchase credits, and complete their TalkAbroad conversations. If they have any questions along the way, you can direct them to the support button on every TalkAbroad page. There will almost always be a live person they can chat with to get their questions answered. We want you to be able to focus on teaching. Leave all of the support to us. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us in this training session. We encourage you to explore all the resources available to professors, including our TalkAbroad sequences. Sequences are ready-to-use conversation topics in a sequence that includes preparation and reflection activities. They include both a professor manual and a student workbook. And don't forget, we're here to help. If you need anything, we're just a few clicks away by chatting with us on the website or emailing your main contact. Enjoy your semester with TalkAbroad. We look forward to hearing how it goes.
¿Tiene un automóvil o tú usas el transporte de público?
Ujú. No, yo tengo un automóvil, tengo un carro. He tenido un automóvil bueno, desde que empecé la universidad, porque el transporte público en Guatemala no es muy bueno, es un poco peligroso usar un autobús, así que es un poco más seguro usar un carro, aunque el tráfico es muy malo, pero es más seguro usar un carro. Ujú. ¿Y tú? ¿Usas un carro, usas el transporte público, bicicleta o qué usas para moverte en la ciudad?
Sí. Tengo un automóvil. Es necesario porque Florida es muy grande.
Ujú.
Y mi campus de escuela es far away.
Lejos, lejos.
Sí.
Ujú.
Pero
Mm.
mi esposo montar el bicicleta para trabajar, pero
Ujú.
necesito el automóvil.
Ujú. Creo que eso es algo muy bueno. En Guatemala es un problema. Guatemala tiene muchas montañas, así que usar una bicicleta o caminar es algo imposible realmente en Guatemala. Es muy difícil.
Sí. Mi esposo y yo visitamos Antigua y Lake Atitlan.
Así.
Y like 3 años pasado, pero encantamos Guatemala, es muy bonita.
Und ja, das Thema für heute ist über Fremdsprachen. Und du weißt Französisch und ein bisschen Englisch. Also, warum lernst du oder warum hast du Französisch gelernt?
Also Französisch habe ich gelernt, weil ich das in der Schule hatte. Das ist normal. Also man hat zum Beispiel Englisch hat man, glaube ich, jetzt ab 6 oder bis 9 Jahren. Ich habe das mit 9 Jahren gelernt. Und Französisch hatte ich in der 7. Klasse mit 12 Jahren. Das ist normal. Man hat eine zweite Fremdsprache in Deutschland mit 12, 13 Jahren. Die meisten lernen jetzt Spanisch. Ich habe das damals, war es noch Französisch. Und dann musste ich an der Uni auch eine zweite Fremdsprache vorweisen.
Ja.
Und ich habe aber alles vergessen aus der Schule über mein Französisch. Das heißt, ich habe sie nochmal lernen müssen. Und nach 2 Jahren in der Uni habe ich dann gedacht, okay, jetzt hast du diese Sprache 2-mal in deinem Leben gelernt. Jetzt musst du diese Sprache sprechen. Also bin ich nach Frankreich gegangen für 1 Jahr und habe sie dann erst richtig gelernt.
Ja, und wo in Frankreich?
Das ist ganz im Norden an der belgischen Grenze. Die Stadt heißt Lille.
Lille. Okay. Ja, ich weiß nicht über Frankreich oder Lille. Aber ja, sehr interessant.